Amidst the intensifying Russian aerial attacks, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has shot off a fresh warning to the Russian President Vladimir Putin. In an interview that he gave to Axios, Zelensky was asked what is that one tangible thing that Ukraine needs from the American President Donald Trump to win on the battlefield. Now, responding to that question, Zelensky said that he had already conveyed the message to Trump and the United States is working on it, adding that the weapon system will put additional pressure on Russia and Ukraine may not have to use it. Now, Zelensky did not specify the exact weapon system that Kyiv had sought, but his remark that the weapon will put additional pressure on Moscow and will hasten the end of the war has left many people guessing about the nature of the weapon system that the Ukrainians perhaps want. Now, according to a report in The Telegraph, Zelensky requested for the Tomahawk missiles in a closed-door meeting with Trump. The long-range cruise missiles would put Moscow in range of Kyiv's strikes. The Tomahawk missile is a subsonic cruise missile with a range of about 1,500 to 2,500 kilometers, and it is capable of carrying 1,000-pound conventional warheads and also cluster munitions. The Tomahawk missile will be far more effective than any other similar range weapon in Kyiv's arsenal. Now, Zelensky's comments have come just days after he claimed that the US president was considering long-range weapons for Ukraine and supported tit-for-tat Ukrainian strikes in response to Russian attacks. So as the war in Ukraine intensifies, the question, of course, is this: will a new long-range weapon force Moscow to consider peace and come to the negotiating table? All right, now to give us more perspective on this, we are joined on this broadcast by Mr. Bishop Garrison, who is a senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense and the current senior fellow and adjunct professor at the National Security Institute at the George Mason University Law School. Mr. Garrison, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, this of course, has set off a lot of speculation on what the Ukrainian leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, now wants as American assistance, because he seems to have suggested that he spoke of one particular weapon system, which is now being speculated was perhaps the Tomahawk missile system from the American President Donald Trump, which would bring the Russians to the negotiating table without the Ukrainians having the need to use it. Are you convinced that this is something that the Americans can provide to the Ukrainians, and can it have this kind of an impact on the Ukraine war?
Well, first off, thank you for having me this evening. Well, no one piece of technology is going to completely dominate or turn the tide of this war at this point. I do believe if Ukraine is able to actually get a Tomahawk missile system, they could potentially help them push back Russian aggression. However, something your viewers need to understand about the Tomahawk missile system is typically it's fired from platforms that are naval vessels, that are submarines, or strategic bombers. Now, this is a limitation for the Ukrainian armed forces because they're not going to be able to leverage the missile system in that same way. If they're going to use it as a part of any type of ground operation, then you're talking about that type of system would have to be completely recalibrated, resupplied as a part of overall operations, which again provides a logistical issue for them overall. And that puts aside the fact, which is not a small point, that U.S. policy is going to have to ultimately shift on this point as well. Yes, we've sold these types of weapon systems in the past to our very close allies, the Netherlands, here recently this year. However, again, this is a very different situation, and it's one in which we are now talking about providing one of our allies in Ukraine this type of technology with, and for their own ongoing conflict with someone that we're not currently at war with in Russia. Given the fact that Russia is continuing to provide aggression across the region, I think it's something the Trump administration is likely to take very serious and a very deep look into.
You know, but looking at the comments that Donald Trump has been making off late, there's a clear shift in what he's saying, because recently he has suggested that Ukraine can actually push back the Russian war machine and retake the territory that it has lost to Russia in the last 3 years. Why do you think Donald Trump is saying this? He's also called Russia a paper tiger. Is there a difference in Donald Trump's policy now in aiding the Ukraine war, or what is Donald Trump's game plan by suggesting that Ukraine can retake its territory?
Well, I think a small problem in this is the game plan tends to shift a little bit with each coming interaction. I will say that it is clear that the Trump administration sees the potential threat that Vladimir Putin and the Russian government continues to push forward within the broader region. We know that sanctions have worked and can continue to work, but we also understand that some of our own regional partners in the area rely to some degree on Russian national gas and petroleum and oil. So this is an opportunity to push back verbally and say, Russia, if you don't pull back on these operations, we're going to have to step in a bit more. I think this is an opportunity to push Russia into a position in which they take it upon themselves to make a determination that continuing this conflict is not in their best interest, and they make a shift backward. Now, that said, nothing has really demonstrated thus far that Vladimir Putin is going to be willing to do that, but it is at least I would argue, worth an effort to use this type of policy shift to see whether or not they'd be willing to step back.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Mr. Garrison, for joining us with that perspective there.
Thanks for having me.